Welcome to another deep dive. You know, I love to explore those big questions that keep us up at night, and today we're tackling a big one. Why do some people seem to handle life's curveballs with grace, while others, well, let's just say they struggle a bit more?
Right. It can feel like some people are just naturally better at navigating challenges and making decisions.
And if you're anything like me, you've probably wondered if there's some secret sauce, some magic formula that they're privy to.
Well, I recently dove into this audiobook, Critical Thinking Mastery, Transform Your Mindset for Ultimate Personal Growth. And it might just hold the key.
Okay, color me intrigued. So what does this audiobook say is the secret weapon for those who seem to have it all figured out?
It all boils down to critical thinking. But here's the good news.
Oh, I'm all ears.
The book emphasizes that it's not about being born a brilliant strategist or having some innate genius level intellect.
Okay, so it's not like some people are just hardwired for success while the rest of us are left to flounder.
Exactly. It argues that critical thinking is a skill, a muscle you can build through practice.
That's a huge relief, honestly. It means we all have the potential to get better at it right.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating a disciplined way of thinking rather than relying on gut reactions or emotional impulses.
So instead of just being bombarded with information and feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
we can learn to actually process it effectively.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we start flexing that critical thinking muscle?
The audiobook points to self-awareness as the foundation.
Makes sense. You can't really solve a problem if you don't understand where you're starting from.
Right. It's about becoming aware of those patterns without being swept away by them. It suggests that to think critically, we first need to understand our own thinking patterns, how we typically approach problems, what biases we might have, where our blind spots lie.
So we're not trying to stop our thoughts, but rather to understand them better.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, you mentioned biases earlier.
Yeah.
The book dives into those too, right? These hidden factors that can really mess with our thinking without us even realizing it.
Precisely. They can be like invisible players on a chessboard, influencing our decisions without us even knowing it.
Okay, that's a bit unsettling. Can you give us an example of one of these invisible players? What are some of the common biases we should watch out for?
One that trips up a lot of people is confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias.
It's our tendency to favor information that supports what we already believe.
So it's like we're only looking for evidence that confirms what we already think,
Yeah.
even if it's not the most accurate or complete picture.
Exactly. We're essentially cherry-picking information to fit our existing narrative.
That definitely doesn't sound like fair or balanced thinking.
It's a natural human tendency, but being aware of it helps us step back and say, okay, am I just cherry-picking information here? Am I really considering all sides of this?
Great point. So confirmation bias is like one of those hidden pieces on the chessboard.
It is.
Are there any other biases the book highlights?
Another common one is the availability heuristic.
Availability heuristic. Okay, I haven't heard of that one.
This is where we tend to overestimate the likelihood of something happening just because it's vivid or memorable.
I see. Our brains are drawn to the dramatic, even if it doesn't reflect the bigger picture.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid falling into these mental traps? Does the book offer any strategies for outsmarting our biases?
It emphasizes the importance of actively seeking out information that challenges our existing beliefs.
So instead of just staying in our own little echo chambers, we need to venture out and expose ourselves to different viewpoints.
Precisely. It's about cultivating that mental flexibility to consider different perspectives, even if they initially feel uncomfortable.
It's like stepping outside our comfort zone and realizing that there's a whole world of ideas out there.
Yeah.
But that can be tough, right? Especially if we're used to sticking with what's familiar.
It can be challenging for sure, but think of it as an adventure for your mind.
I love that. It's not about proving ourselves right, but about expanding our horizons, broadening our understanding, and ultimately becoming more well-rounded thinkers.
Exactly. And the audiobook goes on to present problem solving as another key component of critical thinking.
Problem solving. Okay, so we're not just talking about analyzing information, but also about applying those critical thinking skills to real-life challenges.
Right. It compares a problem to a tangled knot, with each strand representing a different aspect of the issue.
Okay, I love a good analogy. So how does the audiobook suggest we go about untangling those knots?
It starts with clearly defining the problem. Often we jump to solutions before we fully understand the issue at hand.
So instead of just reacting to the tangled mess, we take a moment to really understand what we're dealing with.
Precisely. Once we have a clear understanding of the problem, the audiobook guides us through a process of brainstorming potential solutions, carefully evaluating each option, and finally selecting the best course of action.
It's like we're becoming detectives of our own thoughts and challenges using critical thinking as our magnifying glass.
That's a great way to put it. And this problem-solving process isn't just for major life decisions, right? It can be applied to everyday situations, too.
Definitely.
From resolving conflicts in our relationships to navigating tricky situations at work, these critical thinking skills can help us tackle challenges more effectively.
Okay, so we've talked about self-awareness, mindfulness, those sneaky biases, and the problem-solving process. What else is packed into this critical thinking toolbox?
The audiobook emphasizes that effective communication is another vital piece of the puzzle.
Communication. Oh, that's a big one. It's about building bridges of understanding, not just transmitting information right,
Exactly.
especially with all the communication challenges we face these days.
Right. The audiobook even touches on the Socratic method.
The Socratic method. Now, I've heard of that, but I admit I don't fully understand how it works. Could you give us a quick breakdown?
Imagine you're discussing a complex topic with someone. Instead of just stating your opinions, you ask a series of open-ended questions,
Okay.
designed to help them examine their own assumptions and arrive at a deeper understanding on their own. It's about guiding the conversation, not dictating it.
That sounds fascinating. I can see how that would be a valuable tool, not just for learning, but also for fostering more meaningful conversations.
It is.
But it also seems like it requires a lot of patience and skill to do it well.
Definitely, it's a practice. The more we engage in these thoughtful exchanges, the more adept we become at guiding ourselves and others toward deeper understanding.
This has been such a great overview of the key concepts from the audiobook. But I'm curious, how do we move beyond the theory and actually apply these critical thinking skills in our everyday lives? Does the audiobook provide any guidance on that?
Absolutely. It encourages us to view critical thinking as a lens through which we experience the world.
So it's not just something we do in isolated situations, but a way of approaching life as a whole. I love that image.
It is. It's about becoming more conscious, more deliberate in how we think, how we process information, and how we make decisions.
Okay, so we've explored the foundational elements of critical thinking, but how do these skills actually play out in real-world scenarios? I guess we'll have to dive into that in part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back. We are discussing how critical thinking can be seen as a lens for navigating everyday life.
Right, a way to see things more clearly and make better decisions.
Exactly.
So let's get practical. The book talks about relationships, right? How can critical thinking help us in those sometimes messy, sometimes wonderful entanglements we call relationships?
Well, it emphasizes that critical thinking isn't just about cold, hard logic.
Oh, good, because relationships are definitely not always logical.
Right. It's also about understanding the emotional landscape.
Both are our emotions and those of the other person.
Exactly.
So how does that play out in, say, a heated argument with a partner or a friend? It's tough to stay rational when emotions are running high.
Instead of getting swept up in the heat of the moment, critical thinking encourages us to hit pause.
I like that, hit pause.
Take a step back and ask, what are the underlying needs and motivations at play here? Are we communicating clearly, or are we just talking past each other?
It's like taking a deep breath before saying something you'll regret. Creating that space to really assess the situation before reacting impulsively.
It is. It's about responding, not just reacting.
And that ability to pause and analyze can be super helpful in the workplace too, right?
Absolutely. Work can be a breeding ground for misunderstandings and conflicts.
Definitely. Tight deadlines, conflicting priorities, team disagreements. How can critical thinking help us navigate those challenges?
Often we jump into problem-solving mode before we fully understand the root cause of the issue.
Makes sense. We're so focused on putting out the fire that we don't stop to ask how it started in the first place.
Right. Critical thinking encourages us to slow down, clearly define the problem, gather information from various perspectives, and consider the bigger picture.
So instead of just reacting to the symptoms, we're looking for ways to address the underlying cause.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and strategic in how we approach challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about relationships and work, but there's another area where critical thinking seems more crucial than ever, and that's navigating the overwhelming amount of information we encounter every day.
Information overload. Absolutely. News, social media advertising, it's a constant barrage.
It can feel like you're drowning in a sea of opinions and perspectives. How does critical thinking help us stay afloat?
It's about becoming a discerning consumer of information, developing that inner BS detector that helps us evaluate the validity and reliability of what we're reading or hearing.
So not just blindly accepting everything at face value, but taking a step back and asking those critical questions. Who's saying this? What's their agenda? What evidence do they have to support their claims?
Precisely. It's about developing those filters that help us separate fact from fiction substance from spin.
Especially in today's world where misinformation can spread like wildfire, those critical thinking skills seem more important than ever.
Absolutely. The book stresses that critical thinking empowers us to make more informed choices.
Not just about what we believe, but also about how we spend our time, energy, and resources.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about how critical thinking can help us in our relationships at work and even in navigating the information overload of the digital age. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that I'm really curious about, and that's the ethical dimension.
Right.
Does the audiobook address the ethical considerations that inevitably come with critical thinking?
It does. The audiobook emphasizes that critical thinking isn't just about thinking smart. It's also about thinking right.
Okay, I love that thinking right.
It is.
So what does that look like in practice? How does critical thinking guide us toward ethical decision-making?
It starts with recognizing that ethical dilemmas are rarely black and white.
They're often shades of gray, competing values, different perspectives.
Exactly. So instead of jumping to conclusions or relying on gut reactions, critical thinking encourages us to pause and carefully consider all sides of the issue.
To weigh the potential consequences and make choices that align with our values and principles.
Right. And to remember that ethical decision-making is an ongoing process. It's not something we do once and then check off our list.
It's about constantly reflecting, learning, and growing. So in a sense, critical thinking isn't just about making better decisions. It's about becoming more ethical and responsible individuals.
It is. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and making choices that contribute to a more just and compassionate world.
That's a beautiful thought. But I have to admit, even with this newfound appreciation for critical thinking, I still feel a bit daunted by the prospect of actually cultivating and maintaining these skills. It seems like a lifelong endeavor.
It is, but it's a journey worth taking, and the book offers some valuable insights on how to stay the course. We were just talking about how developing critical thinking skills is an ongoing journey.
Right, it's not like we reach a certain level and then we're done. It's about constantly learning and evolving. So how does the audiobook suggest we stay on that path of continuous improvement?
One of the key takeaways is the importance of nurturing a mindset of lifelong learning.
Lifelong learning. Okay, so it's about staying curious about the world, even as we get older, and maybe more set in our ways.
Exactly. It's about being open to new ideas, new experiences, new perspectives, even if they challenge our existing beliefs.
So it's not just about acquiring knowledge, but also about being willing to unlearn and relearn things as needed.
Precisely.
Makes sense, especially in a world that's changing so rapidly.
Right. The audiobook also emphasizes the importance of deliberate practice. It's not enough to just passively consume information. We need to actively engage with it.
So it's not just about reading a book or listening to a podcast, but about really wrestling with the ideas, analyzing them, applying them to our own lives.
Exactly. And that's where connecting with other curious minds can be so valuable.
Oh, I love that. Having those thought-provoking conversations, bouncing ideas off each other, challenging each other to think more deeply.
It's like having a mental sparring partner, someone who pushes you to grow and expand your thinking.
Now I'm wondering, does the book address the potential pitfalls or challenges we might encounter on this critical thinking journey? It can't all be smooth sailing, right?
You're right, there will be obstacles. One of the biggest challenges the audiobook highlights is the tendency to slip back into comfortable but unproductive thinking habits.
Ah, yes, those cozy little mental ruts that we can so easily fall into.
It happens to the best of us. We start to rely on shortcuts or assumptions, we avoid challenging our own beliefs, and we end up stuck in those same old patterns of thinking.
So how do we break free from those mental ruts? Does the book offer any guidance on that?
It emphasizes the importance of self-reflection, of regularly checking in with ourselves and asking, am I staying true to these principles of critical thinking? Am I actively seeking out diverse perspectives? Am I challenging my own assumptions?
So it's about creating a feedback loop, a system of accountability that keeps us on track and helps us identify areas where we need to improve.
Exactly. It's about being honest with ourselves and making adjustments when needed.
Now I'm curious about the bigger picture. Does the audiobook touch on how these critical thinking skills can impact not just our personal lives, but also the world around us?
It does. The book argues that critical thinking is essential for creating a more informed, engaged, and responsible citizenry.
Okay, so it's not just about individual growth, but also about collective progress.
Exactly. In a world where misinformation and polarization run rampant, those who can think critically are better equipped to separate fact from fiction, to evaluate different perspectives, and to contribute to meaningful dialogue and positive change.
So it's about using those critical thinking skills to not only navigate our own lives, but also to make the world a better place.
It is. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and making choices that benefit both ourselves and the greater good.
That's a powerful message, and it leaves me feeling hopeful and inspired. So to our listener out there, we hope this deep dive into critical thinking mastery has been a thought-provoking and maybe even life-changing experience for you. Remember, critical thinking is a journey, not a destination. Keep those mental muscles flexed, stay curious, and never stop questioning. Until next time, happy thinking.